This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Bill Coleman here, and this is our 11th week in our 14-week program. And exciting to see the progress and hear the enthusiasm, see that we've got the great groups still participating with us every week. And we're gonna go right to our presenters today. And then checking on time at the end, we'll see how we can go around and have our round robin reporting. All too often, as we think about broadband, we think about, who can bring us some resources to help fund our program. And so last week we talked about the state and federal programs that are available. But, local broadband funding, putting our own dollars in is kind of a healthy thing as far as I'm concerned. It really shows local commitment and can help push projects over the top in terms of financially, grant competitiveness, and so on. So having that local commitment is really important. Today we have two speakers from the local finance industry. We have Elizabeth Hennessy, who is a managing director for Raymond James. And Elizabeth has a long history in public finance and working strong with education partners, as well as cities, counties, and villages, park districts, and so on. Getting those dollars placed in public or private hands is a big part of selling public finance and making that a competitive way to finance projects. And so Elizabeth is expert in that. We also have Seema Patel, who's a senior counsel with Chapman, a law group in Illinois. And Seema also has been heavily involved in public finance and working for almost 15 years at Chapman, working in as bond counsel, disclosure counsel, underwriter, and so on. Making sure you do these projects correctly is an important part of public finance as well, because we don't, I once had a boss who told me, it's okay to be in the newspaper one day, but you don't want to be in the newspaper a second day. And so it's having good counsel is an important part of that. And so I'm going to welcome Elizabeth to start this morning. And Elizabeth, do you want me to run your slides?
Yes, Bill, that would be great. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, just fine. And so I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get going.
Thank you. Thank you. And I apologize, my camera is not working this morning.
And we're good to go.
All right, wonderful. So again, thank you for that wonderful introduction. As Bill mentioned, I have been working with local governments here in Illinois for over 30 years on financing options, and certainly broadband, we hope, can become one of those. Seema Patel, Senior Counsel at Chapman, is going to start our presentation this morning by starting right there with what the powers and limitations of you as local government units have in regard to the broadband situation.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in this conversation. As Liz mentioned, and Bill mentioned, I've been doing this for quite a while, and broadband has certainly become the very, very hot topic on the national scale, and rightfully so. The pandemic has certainly highlighted how important high-speed internet access is to our communities, for education, for health, for business opportunities. And so Liz and I are certainly very excited about what may be able to happen in Illinois and how all of your communities can sort of capitalize on this push nationally. Now, for Illinois bond issuers, as counties, as cities, as villages, community college districts, school districts, if you want to issue municipal bonds, it has to be for a lawful and corporate purpose. So a school district, for example, could not issue bonds for park purposes because they're not established for park purposes. The bonds are subject to constitutional, statutory, debt limit considerations. There's a number of rules, quite frankly. And our job as the attorney, as Bill mentioned, is to make sure that these things are done correctly and according to the rules that apply to you as an issuer. But they do vary quite a bit based on the type of entity. And then there are certain other constitutional and statutory provisions that apply as well. Illinois, as you all know, has very, very, very many units of local government, more than any other state, except for California. And so it provides a lot of opportunity, but it can also complicate matters because so many different entities can be involved. With something like broadband, it's an opportunity, I think, for multiple organizations, multiple entities to really cohesively create a plan and put it into action. So I think there are opportunities here that we can utilize, if we kind of think outside the box a little bit. Next slide, please. So in Illinois, we have two types of governmental units, overarching. There's home rule units and there are non-home rule units. Home rule units have a lot more power, quite frankly. These are certain municipalities with a population of 25,000 or more, or municipalities with a population of less than 25,000 that have elected by referendum to become home rule. And currently there are 218 home rule governmental units in Illinois. It allows those units, the home rule governmental units, are able to exercise any power and perform any function pertaining to its own internal affairs, including the power to tax and incur debt, without any limitations. Really, there are some constitutional limitations. There's still, you can't have bonds that go out 100 years, for example. The payment schedule has to be reasonable within the constitutional limits. But it does not have the same statutory requirements that most of the other Illinois governmental entities do. So for a governmental unit, a home rule governmental unit, like say Cook County could issue general obligation bonds payable from a tax levy, or particular revenue bonds payable from, let's say, broadband system revenues. And those bonds can all finance a broadband project. And that's it. It's as simple as that for a home rule unit of government. Unfortunately, in Illinois, the only county that is home rule is Cook, which makes it a little more complicated for everyone else, quite frankly. And there are multiple larger cities and villages that are home rule, but obviously they would be limited in issuing bonds only for their city or village, so they couldn't necessarily then affect the more rural areas within the county. So just something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Non-home rule governmental units, which is the vast majority of governmental units in Illinois, fall under what is known as Dillon's rule. So they can only exercise the powers which are expressly granted in the statute. And what that means is the powers of a school district, for example, are what is in the school code, period. There's nothing else in terms of authority that school districts have to do anything outside of what is laid out very specifically in the school code. If the power is neither expressly granted by statute nor necessarily implied, it does not exist. So the power has to be in the statute, which of course limits what each entity is able to do. Next slide, please. Liz, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sorry, I had to unmute there. So the borrowing alternative for non-home rule governmental units for any capital project for the municipality are really, without referendum, alternate bonds or double-barreled bonds. So they may be used for any corporate purpose. There are two sources of revenue pledged to alternate bonds: the enterprise revenue or the pledged revenue that you intend to use, whether that's something like, you know, I guess if we were able to do a broadband project, fees for from broadband providers, and the backup credit would be the full faith and credit general obligation tax levy. So that is a true backup levy that goes on the books at the time the bonds are issued, and then each year as the enterprise revenue, such as either a broadband revenue, sales tax, something like that, becomes available to pay the debt service, the municipality would then abate that backup tax levy. So it's important to do that every year. And the great thing about alternate bonds is that there really is very strong credit in the market. Investors look at them as true general obligation bonds, even though you're using a pledged revenue. In Illinois, the rule is that you need to have those pledged revenues, the first revenue, cover the debt payment, principal and interest, by 1.25 times. Or 1.1 times for a governmental revenue source like a county facility sales tax or something like that. You also have to have an audit or feasibility report that demonstrates historically that revenue would provide that 1.25 times coverage. You have to also have a 30-day backdoor, well, I hate that word, so I'm going to just call it a 30-day petition period. Backdoor referendum makes it sound sneaky, but it is simply the statutory process to allow the community to object to a bond issue. If there's a 10%, or in this case, 7.5% or more of the registered voters who feel this issue would need a front door referendum. You need to have a public hearing on the issue, and the levies are outside of the tax cap. There's no debt limit applied to alternate bonds. They're above the debt limit, so they're really a great financing tool. Next page. Debt certificates are the other financing option for non-home rule governmental units, and those are like alternate bonds in that you are pledging a revenue within your budget to pay the debt service on the debt certificate. So it takes careful review of your budget to find the revenue you're going to pledge. How it's different than alternate bonds is that it doesn't have to be that same revenue every year. So it could be a general fund revenue one year. It could be an available sales tax the next year. It's just got to be clear that it is a available revenue that you can pledge, is not restricted for any purpose like pension or something. Debt certificates do constitute a general obligation of the issuer, and again, payable from any lawfully available funds, and they consider it a general obligation because it comes to the same credit level like any bill or any contractual obligation, like any salary contract that you have. like your electric bill, it's on that parity of payment. It's a bill, it's a contract, and if you don't pay it, the investors will simply sue the municipality to force payment. There's no separate tax levy, so you don't have to worry about those abatements every year like you do in alternate bonds, but these debt certificates are subject to the debt limit. Okay?
So for a non-home rule governmental unit to issue bonds for broadband purposes, there has to be a statute that allows them to do so. There has to be statutory authority. And in 2007, the legislature did enact the High-Speed Internet Services and Information Technology Act, which allowed, as you can read here, any municipality or county may undertake local broadband projects. And of course, my lawn guys decided to just show up, so I apologize in advance for the background noise. And the provision of services in connection therewith. What this means is that a municipality, a county, which one did undertake pursuant to this legislation, can create a municipal broadband network in the state of Illinois, and they can own it. They can pledge the revenues created from it to, say, an alternate bond or to a debt certificate. And this allowed, for that opportunity from a local finance perspective, which oftentimes is a requirement of the federal and state grant programs that the local community also fund at least a portion of the project. So it created that opportunity in 2007. However, next slide, please. This was repealed in June of 2019. And the repeal was included in legislation which provided $400 million to the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity for grants, basically for broadband development throughout the state. And the statewide grant program that, quite frankly, hasn't been necessarily as active as I think some people were hoping. And the repeal, likely was influenced by some of the current broadband providers in the state that don't necessarily want more competition. And so at this point, next slide, please. For a non-home rule governmental unit to issue a debt certificate or alternate bond for broadband projects in Illinois, there is the need for legislation. That could be reinstatement of the prior High-Speed Internet Services and Information Technology Act. It could be new legislation, maybe limited to counties or to municipalities. Maybe that makes it more appealing. But regardless of what it looks like, it has to occur for the vast majority of governmental units in Illinois to even be able to contemplate sort of a project like this for a non-home rule unit. Home rule units, you're ready to go if that's what you would like to do. Home rule units can issue debt for any governmental purpose. Broadband is a legitimate governmental purpose that has been become clear over the past few years, certainly, and is not arguable at this point. Home rule units can issue full faith and credit general obligation bonds, which is a very, very strong instrument in the market. And that allows, again, for that property tax levy to be used to pay for the bonds. But oftentimes municipalities have other revenues that they'll utilize, and then they can abate those property taxes, which can make a project more palatable from a community perspective, certainly. And here I'm gonna let Liz take over again. She's gonna speak a little bit about the market right now. 2022 has been a very strange year, as we've all seen in the financial markets, and certainly inflation pressures have impacted everyone in a variety of ways. And I think it's important that, all of you kind of understand where we are in the market, and also understanding historically, although the rates have come up certainly in the last few months, it's still lower than it has been historically. But I'll let Liz talk about that.
Seema, before Liz jumps
Sure.
in with that, I'm wondering if you see any activity with the municipal association, the League of Cities, I'm not sure what they call that in Illinois, or the counties, to recover that power. Is that on their agenda?
I have not heard that. IML, IGFOA, it hasn't been a topic that I'm aware of. I think that in Illinois, we have this Office of Broadband with Matt Schmidt, but there hasn't been a lot of information. There's a grant program. What does it mean exactly? You can apply. When do you get those funds? What can they be used for? What does the local match, so to speak, have to look like? Does an entity have to have funds on hand to be able to provide that? I mean, that doesn't seem realistic at all, right? So I do think it's important that, whether it's the county's organization or IML or whichever might be, the most suited to kind of take this on as a topic, I think it needs to get there, because certainly the need is there, especially in the more rural parts of the state. And the federal funding and the timing of it, which I believe you discussed in last week's call, correct, Bill?
Yes.
And obviously you have to get those projects in place. You have to apply for those grants. And I believe next year, is it next September, that everything has to be, your grants have to be completed, your projects kind of have to be moving. So there's not a lot of time really to access some of those federal funds.
Yeah, and so unfortunately, the federal government is in combination with states moving pretty slow in my kind of thing. A lot of planning time for the states to do plan and so on. So getting legislation in place. I'm just wondering if anyone on the call has any, if they're participating in the various municipal or countywide organizations, are they, is this on their agendas? Have you heard that? A lot of silence there. So either a lot of people with mute buttons or not much information there. And so that would be, if there's, some states have rural broadband advocacy groups that are involved in trying to get those powers. When the state passed their 400 million, and all of a sudden this prohibition about municipal financing or government financing was eliminated, there's clearly lobbying action happens at the Capitol for a reason there. And I suspect that larger companies were very afraid of local governments using the grants in combination with their own local bonding to build networks in their communities. And so but you can see the negative impact on that. Thank you, Seema. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Bill. If you could go to the next slide. So here is a recap of the AAA Municipal Market Data Index, which is our indicator for tax-exempt municipal bonds and treasury rates. The purple line is the 1-year, the red line is the 10-year, the yellow line is the 30-year, again, AAA Municipal Market Data Index for municipal bonds, and then the blue line is the 10-year U.S. Treasury rate. So if we go back to 2019, we can see that interest rates were coming down, and then we hit in March of 2020 the pandemic, the realization that we're in a pandemic, and interest rates went up dramatically. The Fed stepped in and calmed the markets, lowered interest rates down to zero. And then in August of 2020, we hit a historical all-time low point in interest rates for borrowers. And we really had a relatively stable period of time all the way to January of this year. And then with some of these inflation indicators coming out so strong, and the expected Fed action, and then the Fed action that we've had so far, you know, I think all in 2% increases when you add them all up, you can see rates have risen dramatically. In the last couple weeks, including yesterday, when the Fed raised rates by another 75 basis points, which was right in line with expectations, thankfully, you see rates actually came down a bit. And that is because, I think, two reasons. You've got some market prognosticators who are very convinced that recession is in the not too distant future with these rate increases and the slowdown in the economy. And then the other reason is because the Fed, where they, Chairman Powell said, you know, we do expect to have more rate increases, but I'm not able to give you an idea of what those amounts will be in the future. We're going to see how the inflation indicators continue, what other market unemployment, employment, what other things we see in terms of economic indicators before we make a decision on how much. So that was kind of good news to the market. So for that reason, rates actually came down yesterday after the Fed raised the rates by 75 basis points. And, you know, the market bakes in these expected rate increases. So when the Fed is specific about what they're going to do, and the market is, you know, watching that, baking it into the rates already. So, you know, it was good news that we didn't have interest rates fly up again yesterday. The market rates tend to go up when we have news that's not expected. So that's where we are now. You know, we'll see. There will be future rate increases, but I'm hoping that, you know, we've seen the worst of this dramatic increase, and, you know, the future increases will not be as dramatic. So that's where we're at. But the cost of borrowing from a historic perspective is still, you know, pretty low, especially for long-term borrowing. Most of the damage is on the short end of the yield curve, which is kind of good when you think about investing your funds and buying short-term treasuries and CDs. So that should help with your interest on the interest earning side of the equation. But yeah, short-term borrowing is, and immediate term borrowing is much more expensive now than it was 6 months ago.
Good, thank you.
I did also want to mention, if, you know, there is interest on a local level in Illinois in terms of lobbying Springfield, or, you know, organizing, getting an idea on how to maybe deal with the incumbent providers in these kinds of discussions. There is a new, relatively new national municipal broadband lobbying group association that is actually, you know, could provide resources, I think, to anyone that might be interested. And the chair is actually Angela Emming, who is the director of technology of the city of Highland, which is in Southern Illinois. And so she, you know, obviously is an Illinois resident and is the chair of this national group. It's called the American Association for Public Broadband. And the other participants and players in that group are, you know, proponents of municipal broadband. A few of them work for the Utopia Fiber network in Utah, which is the largest public broadband system, publicly owned broadband system. And Chapman, we've actually worked on those financings for the last 15, 20 years. So I do think that, in terms of resources, they're out there for us as Illinois residents to sort of utilize if there is an interest.
Seema, have we seen any of the home rule communities financing broadband in Illinois in the last several years?
Not that I'm aware of. The city of Rock Falls did as a non-home rule unit prior to the legislation. I think it was probably 2017, 2018. But they have since shut that network down. It just wasn't working for them, quite frankly. But that is in Illinois. And then the city of Highland, which is where Angela Imming is, they established a network many years ago, I believe 2013. So they have a municipal broadband system in the city of Highland.
Okay, good. Questions from the audience? Sorry about that.
Seema, I've got a question for clarification. So with the repeal of the statute in 2019, does that simply precludes the public financing of a broadband network? That doesn't preclude the creation, regardless of funding source, of a network?
That's an interesting question. I think for a non-home rule governmental unit to establish a municipal broadband network and own it, there needs to be actual legislation that says that they can do that. Right now, there's nothing in the municipal code that says that a broadband system can be created, maintained, owned, etc. So it would be difficult to use any governmental funds for that type of a purpose if it's not specifically in the statute that allows for it.
I see. So it goes to the fundamental question of, can the network be created or not just can a public bond issue occur for the financing of the network?
Correct.
Thank you. That's a big hurdle.
It is a big hurdle. The county's code, the muni code, there is a general, for a governmental purpose, for a legitimate corporate lawful purpose. Does broadband fall into that? Certainly, we all know that on this call, but is that what you want to hinge it on without a very specific authority? And then do you have residents or citizens of your communities that are going to fight the use of tax money, whether it's bond related or not, for this, type of a network and system and project that doesn't have very specifically laid out authority in the statute? I just think it's a slippery slope. And for a non-home rule unit to take on that risk, I just don't think it's a good idea.
More kind of a side question, but in these transactions that you've worked on, is Chapman representing the public bodies?
So let's see, what have we done? Yes, we've represented public bodies. We've represented underwriters. So we've been underwriters counsel, which means that there's an offering document that goes out into the public, to describe the issuer, the bonds, the project, the competition, the risks, etc. And it's a very lengthy process to create those disclosure documents, but that's what's being used by investors to decide whether they want to buy the bonds. So we've worked as underwriters counsel on those documents. We worked as bond counsel and disclosure counsel. So we've kind of run the gamut. Some of these on the national front, we are working with private entities, private companies that are broadband providers, or just technology companies that are interested in creating a new network in a certain geographic location. And then they utilize a conduit bond issuer, which could be a local government unit, or it could be a national player, national issuer, and they are issuing bonds, municipal bonds via this conduit governmental unit. But it's actually a private entity as the borrower. So it's, a company in Texas, for example. So we're doing a few of those. Those are kind of the P3, which is also a very hot topic right now, the public-private partnerships. The opportunity is there as well to allow for municipally owned broadband networks or privately owned broadband networks within a certain municipality or certain geographic location. But then that municipality won't own the network. It's this other private entity that does. So there's a couple of different, there's variations around the country. And Chapman, we've been lucky that, we've had this opportunity to really work on a variety of different financing methods across the country and representing different entities within those.
Good, thank
Well,
you.
you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I'm wondering if in the chat, if we actually have any home rule powered communities or counties in our cohort here. If you are, it'd be great to either speak up or go in the chat. Then I also wonder, sometimes it's nice, people find it convenient not to have powers because then the expectations are, oh, we don't have to contribute to a project like this because we don't have the power. And it's in some ways a convenient excuse not to become involved. Like in Bond County, what is that something you guys wish you had the power to do some more financing? Or loaded question. That's why I sent it over to Bond. Your name is Bond.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think I can say anything without, since I don't speak for the whole board, it's not my purview as an individual, so. That's that.
Very safe answer. I'm just curious as the discussion about the powers, and is there a wish that there be more local powers to do this kind of work? Are people familiar that you had a power and then it was taken away? What the reaction is to that? It's very quiet out there. Okay, well, it's just as we go into our planning in the next couple of weeks, it certainly is a limiting factor. And as we know that the competition for broadband providers is not a local one, that's at least statewide or even national, and trying to attract investment. The ability to not be able to support some kind of project, invest in networks, is it might be a little detrimental as you go forward. We've seen Seema, maybe if you have an opinion on this, there's a lot of counties, I'm not sure about Illinois, but generally that have created kind of anchor institution networks. So they connect fiber to schools and county facilities and other cities, and that's a government-owned network. And borrowing money for that kind of network as a capital expense, just like they might for a road. Do they have the power to do that, or is it just in a so you don't know?
They know, because it's not the county, it's not in the county's code. It's that simple, for better or worse. For example, if one of you has a project idea in mind for whatever it might be, whether it's broadband or something else, and you give me a call and you say, hey, we want to do this project and we want to issue bonds to pay for it. My job as an attorney is to look at that statute first thing and say, yes or no, you could do this. And it makes it easier in that sense, right? Especially from a county board member perspective. I completely understand why that is a great way to manage expectations. But then, in these instances where you want to get creative, you want to do something for your community to enhance, some service, you may not be able to do it. So here with broadband, that legislation is really critical for our non-home rule counties, which is all of our counties except for Cook, and the vast majority of our municipalities.
Okay.
Seema, who led the, sorry, go ahead, Bill.
No, you go ahead, Mike.
I'm just curious, who led the campaign for the repeal back in 2019?
We don't know exactly. We have a hunch that it was probably the incumbent broadband providers. So you're looking at the large companies, which I'm not going to name, but I think you can all think of. And they have nationally fought, municipal broadband, governmental broadband, and understandably so, it creates more competition for them. But that is at least our best guess.
We just heard last week about in Ohio that they're last minute 11:45 p.m. before midnight adjournment when the budget is coming up, all of a sudden a provision about community broadband in legislation there, and luckily there was people ready kind of for that, and they were able to, from the community perspective, to fight that and make a difference. But in terms of broadband public policy, know that there's pick whatever company, there might be a half dozen to a dozen paid lobbyists at a Capitol building, and they're there all the time, and they just circle the Capitol. But they're well practiced and very professional and very effective at their jobs. And so that's something that Ohio now has a newly formed kind of a community broadband advocacy group that has that high on their list. We know that like a League of Cities or Counties Association, they may have 20 things on their list, from human services to roads to any number of things that are impacted by the state legislature on county or municipal budgets and powers. And so and we know that when push comes to shove at the end of the day, the big, the county health and human services budget is a main driver of county activities. And so that is something that is at the top of the list for keeping an eye on. Broadband probably is much lower down that list. And so that is, if there's no group that's looking out for you in that field, then you're likely to get run over a few times.
I do think this is where I totally agree with you. And I think connecting with the American Association for Public Broadband, which is a national lobbying and advocacy group, I do think can be very beneficial, because you can utilize what they've already learned, right? And you can connect with people around the country to be able to then push forward, in Illinois with the right groups, the right sort of maneuvers and legislation and tactics, quite frankly, that'll be necessary to make it happen. Because I agree with you. I think on a state-by-state basis, you have a number of incumbent providers, and they vary state by state, but they understandably want to protect their business, and the idea of a better and cheaper alternative to customers coming in is not great for their business model. And so you're going to run into problems there. So I think learning from the success of other communities around the country could be beneficial.
And just kind of put a cap on it, I think each community, each place needs to find its own best strategy for improving broadband, and that could be ranging from working with your existing providers to attracting new providers to starting a public sector initiative. But when you lose the ability to do some of that, that's just one less strategy that you have in your quiver to push forward. And it certainly is a one that you can use to say, hey, well, if your existing providers or we can't get other private sector folks to do it, we'll do it ourselves. And that can be a motivating factor for any number of existing or prospective providers. Any other questions for Seema or Elizabeth? It's kind of a tough deal there that we have this presentation. I think it's important that people know what the powers are, but when they're so limited, that is
Frustrating.
It is frustrating, yeah.
I completely agree. And Liz and I are both want to be helpful and we want to provide hope, certainly. And we care deeply about these types of projects. I mean, to me, public access for broadband, I personally just consider it such an important part of our community development and our opportunities and equality of access for all. And especially through this pandemic, having seen, what's happened in the education system and the healthcare, being able to provide healthcare to people, I think it's so important. So it's something that I am personally very passionate about. And fortunately, I found myself in a position to maybe actually help a little bit. But unfortunately, at least in Illinois at this stage, there needs to be a legislative push.
Yeah, and that'll be up to the League of Cities and the counties and everything to decide if that's something that's on the shared agenda. And if it is, they should push forward. If it's, thank God we don't have that power, because that'd just be one more thing people want from us, and let's stay the heck away from it. That, those are choices that, legitimate choices that people can make. Right. And decide, hey, we're comfortable not being in this role, and then work with the palette you have. So good. Well, Seema and Elizabeth, thank you so much this morning. It was a very thoughtful presentation and very interesting, and I think really is informative to the folks on this call. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the opportunity.
Good. Thank you. Let's do a little roundtable about what's going on in the different communities. I'll go back to Bond County. You're up in my top left corner there. So what's going on there with your initiative, and how's your progress going?
Still working on the middle mile concept, and this is some new information that we'll have to kind of figure out, but we are not looking at owning it ourselves. We're looking at partnering with either a co-op or another company, so that should work well for us.
Okay.
And we got meetings with all the local townships set up next month.
Yeah. We kind of getting all of our townships in the loop here shortly.
Okay. Are you guys engaged around the state broadband middle mile application, and do you know how that impacts you? Do you have a map of that, or how? I have not seen the state system yet. I briefly spoke to Matt, but we haven't really fully engaged in that yet, but I want to connect with him here shortly. Okay, that would certainly be important. I think these middle mile dollars are going to be important, and I expect that the state-led applications are going to be the ones that get funded. So rather than maybe submit your own, how do you fit into the component?
That may be a good solution for what we learned today, then let the state own it, and then we don't have to deal with the home rule issue.
Yeah, and I can't say I'm not all that familiar with the model that the state is pursuing with their application. And so I apologize. But
Yeah,
yes,
if I could interject here for just a second.
please.
Matt really wants to understand, he doesn't necessarily want to control a single application. What he's looking for is to learn about everybody's build or prospective build and make sure that it is coordinated and aligned and done in such a way that it makes the overall Illinois presence, Illinois application, the strongest possible. And that is what the law requires, is that the state in effect bless your application. So just make sure that you have spoken with him. Okay?
That's good, and that makes a lot of sense because we have a lot of neighboring cities that are in multiple counties, so.
Correct. Thank you. Okay.
Good, thanks. Anything else going on in Bond that you want to report on?
I think so.
Okay, thank you. How about Kaskaskia region?
We sent out responses to our broadband ISPs. We haven't got any responses, so we're going to resend Monday afternoon and follow up with phone calls.
Okay. And, you know, sometimes I have to say, providers get nervous when you send them forms to fill out and start asking too many questions. You might think about a more informal process, either individually or some kind of roundtable kind of conversation about broadband in the region and see what they share there. But I would encourage, maybe if with the lack of response, they may feel some of those questions are intrusive. And so if you start off more informally with conversation, that might be the way to go. Good. Anything else from Kaskaskia? How's the survey?
The survey formally came to an end last Friday, but Nancy left it open so I could enter the paper surveys that we did receive, and everything has been entered. And I mean, I don't know what the expectation was as far as with our population on returns, but we're hovering right at 1,000 responses.
Okay, good.
Majority in Marion and Clinton County, which we expected.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. And you know, I think a lot of times they say 400 is a magic number for survey reliability, and so the fact that you have twice that is great. Thank you. And Kankakee County.
Apparently our ISPs are not nearly as nervous as everyone's else's. We sent out our questionnaires. We received 2 back. We're working on a third, helping them with a few of their questions, getting some clarity there. Our survey is coming to a close. I think our deadline on that was today or tomorrow. So we'll be starting to analyze those results. We did not have a huge turnout. Last I looked at the numbers, it was around 150. Somewhere between 150 and 200, but they are spread out countywide, so we did get good coverage throughout the county. So that's about where we're at.
Okay, good. And Ogle?
Yeah, okay, Bill. Starting with our survey, I'm the one with the camera, so I get to be the speaker.
We're mentally supporting.
We have a total of 1,166 surveys. We've really been pushing it the past couple of weeks. Ogle's at 245, Lee's at 322, Boone is up from 13 up to 97, Putnam is at 178. So, yeah, and we still have a couple of county fairs yet coming up, including Ogle counties and whatever. So we're still out there pushing.
Good. And provider discussions?
Yeah, we've been doing that on the middle mile with our private sector providers, and that's been progressing too. I think too much to go into any detail here per se, but yeah, we've got the data and whatever in place because of them. Can I say the name of our key provider? Or we keep that out of it, Pat?
I keep it out.
Okay, we won't name our provider. But they've been doing an excellent job working with all of us, and they've been very transparent. So we're happy with the data that we have in place
And the mapping.
and the
And
mapping.
the mapping.
Good. And it's, you know, with the providers, you know, you're really sorting through like who can really we partner with, you know, you're looking for
Right.
your preferred partners, you're looking for, you know, who's got kind of as Doug Dawson talked about, how, you know, are you on the same page and are you got some parallel interests and so on.
Right.
And so, and that could be one provider, it could be multiple providers as you go. So good, thank you for that.
Yeah, and again, the focus for us is on the middle mile.
Good, thanks. And then Chris, can you say a little bit why that's important for you guys?
There's just a lot of gaps between the communities. And they're mostly very small communities. I know here in Ogle, as an example, once you get out of a couple of the larger, and that's all relative, larger communities, the large providers such as particularly Comcast, as soon as you get out of those towns, Rochelle and Ogle and Oregon, you just don't have much in the way of their type of broadband. And that's what's really needed for any kind of site selection right now, for any kind of both entrepreneurs as well as large companies. And the same could be said for Lee County and Dixon and whatever.
Yeah.
So you get all these small hamlets and whatever. And there's just a lot of space between them and a lot of obstacles. You know,
So your goal is to get fiber in each town then, at least,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
a point of presence to hook on
Yep.
there.
And the key provider we're working with, they've already got the licenses and whatever to, or the authority to use utility corridors, the right of ways, the ComEd poles, et cetera. And that's just so important to make those connections.
Okay, good, thank you.
You're
And you know,
welcome.
the more we share on here about what your strategies are and why and what you're finding, I think that really pays off for the other communities as well. So really encourage you to share what's going on and what's working, it isn't, and so I appreciate that. Kathy in Peoria Woodford.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm at a county fair, so I'm trying to watch cattle show and listen at the same time. So I will definitely plug back into the recording because this was very fascinating. And I think we have the right members of our team that if there is interest or need to carry this forward to the county associations or to the legislature, we have connections in both of those entities within our team. So we'll make sure that we have those conversations. We did a preliminary survey report to Peoria County, to the Health and Education Committee this week, and I think it was well received. They are ready and anxious to start kind of framing up the RFP process that would help inform how their American Rescue Funds get allocated or dedicated to broadband. We've also been approached by a couple of middle mile companies that are really interested in looking at our counties. So I really appreciated the conversation about how Illinois is approaching this middle mile endorsement, because Matt spoke about that during our last session, but I didn't really understand how that was being prioritized. I think that I'll go back to our surveys just really briefly. It's reconfirming what our maps are telling us. And I met with Shabinka a little bit yesterday and talked about what additional overlays we may want to create with our geocoding that we've done. For Peoria County, there's additional data points in our survey and existing data that we need to look at more closely. But it really, it's that rural area, that's the really tough one for us to resolve. We certainly have intercity issues for Peoria, but it's that large, expansive rural area that we need to really work on and think about what the potential solutions might be there. A survey highlighted providers that are working really well in Peoria County, and I think that bears attention as well. And you've talked about that before, is that you have a lot of these local providers who are doing outstanding work in customer service and really making some critical investments in our rural areas. And we just need to find a way to support them. One more issue, and then I'll stop kind of rambling, but we continue to have significant township issues in Peoria County, and that's an area that I want to do some exploration around to see if there are policy changes that need to happen at the state level that could help kind of release some of that tension that is occurring between the providers and the township officials in terms of access and charges and that type of thing, because it truly is interfering with businesses that are wanting to do expansions. So our next steps for both Woodford and Peoria are additional internet service provider interviews. We haven't scheduled those. We wanted to get through the survey process first. So that's on our list as things that we need to do. And then this notion of writing an RFP that would help us in additional feasibility study work and help us in kind of creating a framework for distribution of the American Rescue Funds that are dedicated for broadband in these counties.
Okay.
Questions,
Great.
comments?
No, that sounds really good. And it's a multifaceted approach, and that's what's really required in these community broadband efforts, whether it's working with providers or convincing, some elected officials if they, that big company wants to come down our road and we want to charge them for the right of way, or we're slow on inspections or permitting. There's a lot of things that need to work together to make your community attractive for investment. And some of those we control ourselves. Some of them are a little bit out of our control that we need to go advocate other places. But once you can find those right partners and then think, okay, how can we work together to really make this project happen? It can involve a lot of different activities and actors. So thanks for that, Kathy. That was really helpful. And then Livingston County.
Hi, Bill. This is Alina.
Hi.
I had to step out for a second. Somebody is wanting to pull me out. But regardless, we did have our first ISP interview last week. We had a very good discussion. We're just, as of last week, we were just over 400 responses on our survey. And so what we were doing is looking at the areas that were missing and specifically targeting those areas. We made a commitment amongst the group members to each really try to find 10 individuals in the areas that were not represented to kind of target those areas. So that's kind of where what we've been up to.
Okay, good. Thank you. So here we are, week 11, and weeks 12 and 13 are involved in the community planning meetings where I meet with each of you in your teams and try and put some meat on the bones of your plans. I really encourage you in the next time before your meeting is scheduled to try and get interview your most likely broadband provider partners, so that you have that information as part of the plan. We don't really want to come out with your plan to say, oh, we're going to meet with providers. because this is really an essential part of the program, is to conduct those provider interviews and to bring that discussion into your strategy. So the more progress you can make on those provider discussions, certainly the better over the next week or week and a half or so, as we get those community meetings going. I have a template that I use for the planning, and it can really break it down into two main questions. What have we learned, and what are we going to do about it? And so I've got a PowerPoint presentation template that I'll be sending out to you as a way to kind of organize your thinking. These are not big 20, 30, 40 page text documents, but instead a series of PowerPoint slides with key findings and then key action steps going forward, along with your maps and your survey results. I really encourage you on your surveys to dig into those comments. I think that is a big driver of people's expectations for better broadband service. I think it's a great reflection and kind of people's reflections on their existing providers, not only on service, but customer service, pricing, affordability. I think there's a lot of great information that is in those comments that you can really incorporate into your planning. And so I encourage you to take a hard look at those comments. I think that it's much more interesting than the data. I think it's really informative of, hey, do we want to be partners with this company that everyone's comment on them is negative? You know, that and part of that might be their old network as an issue that doesn't allow them to offer very good service. But part of it is a bigger ecosystem of how they deliver service. And so I think all those things can be brought into your plans to consider what your next steps are. And so then as we move towards week 14, that's where you'll present your plan to the other communities. And that'll be an opportunity to learn from the other communities about what their plans are, and maybe some good thinking that you might want to bring into your own plans. It'll be an opportunity to share your strategies and get feedback as to your strategies or your presentation style, that as you then think about finalizing that presentation and making it to your county boards or to the chambers of commerce or school boards and so on. All again, once again, part of that community messaging, community communications plan that you worked on several weeks ago to get the word out and to build community support for your plan. So that's kind of where we are here in the next 3 weeks as we move towards our Accelerate Graduation program. Does anyone have any questions or comments or things to share? Very quiet group today, so it must be cloudy and rainy there or something in Illinois. So
Bill, just a couple of questions here from us in Ogle.
okay.
Weeks 12 and 13, we're having the regular sessions here.
No.
That would be, we were doing that on our own. Okay. That was
So, yeah, so I will meet with your team, and I'd have to look at the calendar, but I know we have a date certain for that planning meeting.
Yeah.
And that's on my calendar, quite sure. And so that's the only meeting. So we don't have our weekly meetings.
Okay.
Weeks 12 and 13.
All right. That was the question from here. Okay.
Okay. Good.
Thank
Thank you.
Bill, can you repeat that? You said we're not going to have a what meeting?
So we will not have our Thursday morning 8:30 meetings the next 2 weeks. We take 2 weeks off.
Okay.
And then we have our final meeting 3 weeks from today, where you'll present your plans to the communities.
Yes, and your meeting, Mayor, is August 8th between 8:30 and 10:30 a.m. And if anybody doesn't know when their meeting is, I can let them know because I'm looking at Bill's chart.
Well, and hopefully your team leader who signed you up for the meeting will inform you of that, if not already in the next 10 or 15 minutes as we move to our work groups. Good. And so I offer 2 meetings of up to 2 hours each. Some communities signed up to have 1. And frankly, a lot of times a 1 meeting is enough. So if we get through, if you have 2 scheduled and we decide we don't need a second one, it's easy to cancel the other one. And if after I work with your group and you want to meet again, we're happy to try and set that up all, of course, before the big graduation ceremony. Or we can even, if you wanted to do it post, 3 weeks and get back together, I'm happy to do that as well. Well, good. Nancy, let's stop recording and then we'll go to the work group.